Okay. Like a good neighbor. Hi, I'm Josh from State Farm. If you can't read the name tag, that is what it says. Now, I love that every single one of you knew immediately, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Last week it was great. When we mentioned that the series was about being a neighbor, someone yelled out, like a good neighbor, Jesus is there. They Christianized it so fast. They were like a good neighbor, Jesus is there. And I was like, okay, you see where we're going. Now, I'm dressed a little bit. This was the closest I could get to Jake from State Farm, and I was told by one of the Vox security guys that this is not an outfit with a whole lot of riz, but that's okay because Jake from State Farm is hideous, so it just works out. You know what I mean? It works out. Some of you have never seen the commercials. It's okay. It's okay. Anyway, I'm gonna be honest. I don't like insurance, and I don't know that many of you love insurance either because how many of you, wait, let me, real quick, how many of you drive? How many of you drive? Okay. Oh, that's a lot of you. That's a lot of you. So here's what's crazy. You guys are paying crazy amounts of money for gas, and you're paying probably crazy amounts of money for a car, but if you're 16, 17, 18, 19, you're paying crazy money for car insurance. Like crazy. And if you're not paying it, your parents are weeping every night paying it for you. So insurance costs a ton of money. And I'll be honest, I never felt like insurance really showed up for me. Like I remember when I was in high school, I had some kids key my car. And it wasn't targeted, I think, because they keyed on my hood 420. And the best part was when the officer showed up. He was like, man, I have never seen 420 before. And I was like, I don't think that's what it is, man. And he was like, no, this has to be a gang. And I was like, also not that. And he was like, don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of this. And I was like, I'm not confident you will. And then you still had to pay like a premium towards your insurance. You had to put a thing down so that they would cover. It was just a headache. It was a lot. And I'm always worried with insurance that they're going to raise it higher. And you're like, why did you show up at Vox tonight to hear me talk about insurance? That's not it. And we started a series last week about being a good neighbor. And last week we covered, I'm going to recap a little bit. Last week we talked about this story where Jesus introduces us to what it means to be a neighbor. And then we talked about how to be a good neighbor. Jesus tells a story about the greatest commandment in the Bible, love God with all your heart. And then the second greatest commandment, and he says, love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. So Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. And one guy questions Jesus and he goes, hey, who's my neighbor? And the reason he asked was not because he was like, man, Jesus, I want to love everyone. I want to love all of my neighbors. He was trying to make an excuse. You ever try to make excuses for yourself? You're just like, that's not mine. And Jesus erases all of our excuses. This is what we talked about last week. Jesus says, hey, I don't care if you're too busy. Hey, I don't care if you don't really have all the answers. I really don't care if you don't feel like it's your responsibility. I need you to step up and help people when they're in trouble. And we pulled some of this out of the Old Testament, a book in the Bible called Deuteronomy. And here's what's really important. You have to understand that Deuteronomy is, it has a bunch of rules. It has over 630 rules in not just the book of Deuteronomy, but in God's law, there's over 600 laws that the nation of Israel was expected to obey. As a Christian, we don't follow those rules. Those were rules that God gave to the nation of Israel. There were for them, and Israel was never able to follow all of them. They failed again and again and again. So the reason we're looking at them is because they're still useful to us. Like, we can learn stuff from this. We talked last week, I read this verse, Psalm 19, verse 7, that the instructions of the Lord, or his laws or his rules, they're perfect. And they revive the soul. The decrees of the Lord, they're trustworthy, making wise the simple. The commandments of the Lord are right, bringing joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are clear, giving insight for living. And so the Bible ultimately says we can go back and read the law because it's going to give us some things. It's going to give us encouragement. It's going to give us wisdom. It's going to give us happiness. And it's going to give us some help. And so we're going to jump back in to look at some of the things that the Bible talks about, particularly the law, about what it means to be a good neighbor. Now, I have to say this from the get-go. I know I've kind of said it, but I want to make it really clear. What we're about to talk about is not the most exciting part of the whole Bible. In fact, not only is it not super exciting, but when people studied this, particularly when the nation of Israel, they would get their people together and they'd be like, all right, let's try to figure out, I know there's over 600 laws, but like, what are the most important laws? What are the things that we have to do? Like if there's like a top 5, if there's a top 10, what is the thing that we need to be about? And on most of their lists, what I'm about to read you was the very bottom. In fact, they would say, this is the least important rule that God had in the whole Bible. If that doesn't get you pumped, man. So let's look at this. Deuteronomy 22. It's going to be so strange, but I'm telling you, it's going to be worth it. Deuteronomy 22. This is where we got our verse last week. It was talking about, hey, what happens if you see like your neighbor, their donkey passes out in the road, which I know none of you have ever seen your donkey or your neighbor's donkey, or probably more than 5 donkeys in your whole life. But it was talking about how to be a good neighbor. Now, here's what it says, Deuteronomy 22, just a few verses later. Verse 6. If you happen to find a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground, and there are young ones or eggs in it with the mother sitting in the nest, do not take the mother with the young. You may take the young, but let the mother go so that you may prosper and enjoy a long life. That's a weird rule. And then, you know what? The Bible always puts things next to each other that matter. And so I'm going to keep reading. This is verse 8. When you build a new house, you must build a railing around the edge of its flat roof. That way you will not be considered guilty of murder if someone falls from the roof. And I just feel like some of you are so awesome, and you're like, I want to read the Bible and I want to understand it. And 90% of the time, if you've never read the Bible before, you go, I'm going to start at the very beginning. And you open up the book of Genesis, and maybe you get through some of the stories, and then you hit Exodus and like, okay, some fun stories. But then you start getting into some rules, and you're like, okay, this is a little weird. And then you get from Exodus to Leviticus, and Leviticus is a little stranger than Exodus or Genesis ever was. Then you get to Numbers, and Numbers kicks kicks off and it's like, hey, there were 5,000 of these guys and 7,000 of these guys and 8,000 of these guys and 12,000 of these guys and 11,000 of these guys. And you're like, it's freaking a book about numbers. And then if you made it to Deuteronomy, you're going to hit a verse like this and you're going to be like, dude, I don't know that I'm vibing to all this. I don't know that I get this. If you come across a bird's nest laying on the ground, now this is crazy, because this passage of the Bible became such a talking point for some of the teachers of the law. It became such a talking point that it came to have its own name. It became called the Kan Zippor, which ultimately means the law of the bird nest. It was so talked about because it was so strange. They were like, why on earth is this here? What does this have to do with anything? Why does God care? And you have to recognize immediately that this is not a law about veganism, right? It's not like, hey, right, don't eat the birds because save the birds. Now, here's the deal. If you're vegan, I have to say right off the bat, I know if you're vegan, you get a ton of flack. I tried to be vegan for 2 whole weeks. And I'm telling you right now, I do not have the self-discipline to do that. If you are vegan, you are one of the most strongest individuals in this room right now. That is, but I need to say, that is not what that verse is about. Verse 6 says, if you find a bird's nest in the tree, on the ground, it doesn't say don't eat it. It says you can't take the mother, right? So it's not, he's not saving the birds there at all. It says don't take the mom. And then it immediately goes into this verse about a house. And I want to explain a little bit of what's happening and why this matters for us, trying to follow Jesus' advice to love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. So he says, hey, if you find a bird's nest, don't take the mother. Now, if you think about that a little bit, you kind of start to see what's happening. Because if you take the mother, what happens to the eggs? Well, if they're not matured yet and you take the mom, all of the eggs are going to spoil and die. If you have babies and you take the mom, all of the babies are going to starve and die. They can't fly yet. They can't get their own food. And so there's this scenario in which the Bible is saying, okay, you come across this, and if you take the mom, recognize something. And when you take the mom, you don't just kill the mom, you kill everything else. You don't just take the mom, you waste every other creature here. You don't just take the mom, you actually destroy the future of this family. There's this piece about don't take this, and then it says, and this is the most curious part of the verse, it says, you can take the young, but let the mother go so that you may prosper and enjoy a long life. One of the things that it's pointing out is if you let the young grow up, you'll have something for the future. If you let the young mature, you'll supply something, you'll provide something for the future. But if you cut this off, you kill your future. Do you understand? And so God has this moment where he speaks in and he says, I need you to be careful about how you are affecting the future. You need to be thinking now of what will happen later. And then immediately it goes into this piece about a future possible problem. In ancient Israel, about this time, the houses the houses were called four-room houses. That's what they'd call it. This is a picture of an Iron Age. So this is kind of what it would look like. There are, I know it's super pixely. I know, so just stay with me. I'm so sorry. You guys want to see the inside? The inside is beautiful. Look at the inside. Ooh, Obviously, that is, that's a replica. But you see, they have all of these rooms inside. You would cook inside. You would sleep inside. That's inside is where you could be warm. Inside is where you could also be keep cool because it's out of the sun. But there are plenty of moments, go back to that first picture. There are plenty of moments where you would want to be outside. Families often would eat on the roof. So you would take your food and you would go and you would eat on the roof. You would go and hang out on the roof. You would hang out with guests on the roof. That's where you would spend a lot of your time. That was the social place. And here's what's interesting. It says, when you build a house, build a railing. Because if you aren't thinking about the future and someone dies, it says if you don't build the rail and you're ignoring the safety of the possibility of others. If you're ignoring this and someone gets injured, it's on you. We talked last week about the very curious part where the Bible is saying this is your responsibility. And you go, if Dummy falls off the roof, that's on him. You know, like, I have a friend who tells a horror story. She took a team on a missions trip, and they were in Central America. They were playing soccer with some kids, and they were playing soccer, and it was up on this hill, and one of the kids went up, and I can't remember the actual kid's name, but they were like, hey, have y'all seen Johnny? Have you seen Johnny around? And everybody's like, no, haven't seen Johnny. And then somebody was like, oh, Johnny went after the ball when the ball went off the cliff. And they walked to the edge, and the kid was laying at the bottom, had punctured his lung, and was laying with a rock sticking through him. He lived. Now, that wouldn't be a fun story to tell if he didn't. You know what I mean? That'd be, it'd be like, and he's dead. No, he lived, but here's what's crazy about this. That in this, God looked at the people and he said, it's your responsibility to care for the future of others around you. Now, this is tricky because if I'm honest, when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, my thoughts were not exactly, man, I can't wait till I can start establishing a 401k, and I can't, I'm going to make sure that I am the safest driver on the road. Right? Like that's not what you're thinking. That's not what we're thinking. We're not programmed necessarily to jump into our teen years and go, oh man, I'm thinking about my future, and I want to make sure that my future marriage and my future family and my future job and my future this, and I'm not thinking about the future of the city or the future of our family or the future. We're living in the moment. But in order to be a good neighbor, one of the things that we have to think about is the future. We have to care about what's happening around us. We have to care about the safety of others. We have to care about the future that we will provide. This is a big, big deal. The cons are poor. See, a good neighbor cares about what's coming. And it's interesting that it paints the story of the bird's nest and then the house. Because let's be honest, birds might build nests, but you don't have birds building safety harnesses. You don't have birds building these kinds of things. Only humans do. And God has assigned his people to care about the things around him. I need you to hear this tonight. Don't make decisions today that destroy the future. Maybe. I didn't pause because I needed that. I paused because I know what it feels like to be like, you're like, I'm getting something. Oh, he stopped. Okay, all right. Don't make decisions today that destroy the future. And yet, we live at a moment in time in which your future could be destroyed by a simple decision. Something you post online can chase you for all years to come. Like we recognize this kind of. We recognize kind of that if I put something online, it can always come back. And I know that there's a false security. There's a false security in something like Snapchat where I'm like, oh, it disappeared though. It disappeared. No, it didn't. Homie, if somebody sued Snapchat, believe it or not, they have a record of every word, picture, dressed or undressed, explicit language or not, they have a record of everything. There's nothing that you can put out and we go, oh no, it's secret, but it's not. There's decisions that we make today. You know what kills me? And I know you guys are way, 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 like 5 billion times more mature than middle schoolers. But we used to, anytime we would take middle schoolers on trips at this church, we would take middle schoolers to conferences or we'd take middle schoolers to camps. And anytime you tell a middle schooler, like, hey, I need you to bring some money for food, it's a terrible idea. And here's why. Because day one, middle schoolers on any trip, any trip at all, you take them to you could take them to the cheapest food possible. I could walk you in to like Taco Bell and be like, all right, guys, just get enough to eat. And one kid is going, I have $70 and I'm going to blow it all right. I bought tacos for everybody. And you're like, bro, what are you doing? There was always one kid every single year, first day of conference, first day of camp, who showed up and blew 100. He was like, I just bought this sweater because it looks so cool. I'm like, bro, that's a triple XL. It does not fit. Where's your lunch money? He's like, I can't eat. Right? So, like, there's this piece where they're like, spending. And I need you to understand something, that God actually cares about wisdom for the future. The Bible says that blessed is the person who leaves an inheritance not only for their children, but their grandchildren. And here's the most insane thing. I mentioned grandchildren to 14-year-olds, and some of you are like, whoa, I'm not there. But I need you to hear something. I need you to hear something, that God is concerned about the future. God's concerned about the things that are coming. And we see this in the life of Jesus too. There's a couple incredible stories where Jesus feeds thousands of people. Raise your hand if you've heard one of them. Jesus, one point, has this moment where 5,000 guys show up. And I say guys, and I literally mean guys, because they didn't count how many girls or kids showed up at this thing. So there's 5,000 adult men who showed up at this one rally that Jesus had. I mean, there was probably close to 12 to 15,000 people at this. There's another time where 4,000 people show up to hear Jesus. And here's what's incredible about this. In John chapter 6, it says that a huge crowd starts following Jesus. They show up. There's 4,000 people here. And then here it says in verse 5, John 6:5, Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. And turning to Philip, he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" Now, if I were to ask you that question, like if one day I pulled up at Ida Baker, where you at? Yeah, okay. If one day I pulled up at Mariner, where you at? Yeah, okay, not really excited. If I pull up at Cape, where you at? Okay. If I pulled up at North, where you at? Okay. If I pulled up at Oasis, where you at? Okay. If I pull up at your homeschool, where you at? Yeah. I'm not showing up. That defeats the whole illustration. All right, wait. So if I pull up at your school, there's probably 2,000 kids at your school, probably less. If I pull up at your school, 2,000 kids, if there was one day that I showed up at your school and I said, "Oh, snap, everybody's lunch is ruined. You and I have to figure out lunch for them today." Now, here's what's insane about that. Is that Jesus' crowd is probably 5 times bigger than you and me trying to figure out your lunch. But also, we live in 2025. In 2025, DoorDash, Uber Eats, y'all, we could call every Publix in the county and be like, "I need Publix subs pronto." Yes, I mean 2,000, right? Like we can order all kinds of, and you know what? That would still feel insane, wouldn't it? And so Jesus has a crowd, thousands of people. And it's an insane question to ask. Hey, where could we get bread for everybody? That's an insane question to ask. But do you know why he asks it? One of the other stories that talks, the narratives that tells this same story mentions that he asks because he had mercy and compassion on them. The reason that Jesus is like, "Man, I want to make sure that these guys are fed," it tells us later that Jesus is concerned that walking home, some of them might pass out on the journey. Jesus goes, "Man, I see a need right now, and I recognize that there's people that could be in danger. There's people that their safety is a concern." And so Jesus goes, "Hey, we got to do something about this. We have to meet a real need because in the future, they're going to be in danger if we do not." And so Jesus turns to his guys. And poor Philip replied, verse 7, "Even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them." And that's real. And Jesus takes a small amount of food and he prays over it. And they begin to break the food and pass it out. And as they are passing out the food to thousands of people, the food continues to show up. Like the more that they pass out, the more that they have. They're trying to pass out a few loaves of bread and some fish. And what ends up happening is that thousands of people get to eat off of this. It's incredible. God shows up. But do you know what is a really minor detail that's insane in this story? This is probably one of those details that you read this story and you go, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Jesus feeds thousands of people. He's so powerful. Yes, there's so many lessons we could take from this story. But do you know what's more funny to me than just that, more interesting to me at this very moment? Not only does Jesus ask out of concern, and he says, I'm worried about them. I have mercy and compassion. I want to make sure that they're safe. But then it says this, verse 12. After everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, gather the leftovers. He says, gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted. And it says they picked up the pieces, filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. Do you know what's really silly about this? Jesus goes, hey, I know that we just miraculously made food appear. I know that we could do it again. In fact, this is not the first time that Jesus miraculously made food appear. And you know what's insane? Is that Jesus doesn't go, leave it, bro. It's trash. People pick through that. You know how many grubby hands touch that bread? Do you know how Jesus doesn't go, oh, no, don't worry about it, leave it. In fact, it's the weirdest detail in the whole story. Why did anybody tell us that they picked up the leftovers unless it's important for you and I to recognize that nothing gets wasted? Why? Because Jesus is concerned about the future. Jesus is going, hey, we could use this for something else. Hey, Jesus is going, hey, this is something that could be useful. Let's not be inconsiderate. Now, as much as I'm gonna tease my mom a little bit on this. I'm gonna tease my mom. Now, my mom she's a great example of Jesus in so many ways, and this one in particular. My mom is a no waste kind of lady. My mom is the kind of lady that, like, if part of the fruit has gone bad, you cut that part off. You know what I'm saying? If it hits the floor, you scrape that part off. If there's a little bit of green in the sour cream, you move that. If you nothing, I'm teasing her. I'm giving her a hard time. That's an inside joke. But there's a piece in which some of us are so unconcerned. And part of being a good neighbor is being concerned. I know this is not a super spiritual message tonight, but I'm still going to have some piano. So come on up. We're going to close this out in just a second. And I want to help apply this a little bit. What do we do with this? Obviously, there's never been a scenario in your life where you went, man, I just saw a nest in my yard the other day and I killed the mom. I feel so bad right now. Right? That's probably not a real scenario. You have probably never had a real scenario where you're like, I was building a house the other day and a guy fell off and I was like, on you, bro. You've probably never had that happen. But let me just say a couple of things. And these are going to be silly, but part of being a good neighbor is caring for the future. On a minor scale, what does it look like if we applied this to the way that we drove our cars? Right? What if the way we drove our cars was considerate of being a good neighbor? It's difficult for me to justify changing the song while checking a text message and doing 60. It's difficult for me to justify that. On a minor scale, what would happen if we applied this kind of idea to the way that we drove? On a minor scale, what would happen if we applied this to the way that we showed up at our work and we were concerned about the welfare and the care of others? What if we actually cared about the future? What if we weren't wasteful? What if we as Christians were constantly resourceful? On a minor scale, there's, I think, a lot of ways that we can apply this. But on a major scale, I need you to think of something. Because the cons of poor ended up becoming a major theme in Jesus' day and beyond. Because people began to say, well, what if this means that we need to be good stewards of every resource that we have? What if one of the things that God wants me to do is be responsible and reasonable and wise constantly about my finances? And so what if instead of blowing hundreds of dollars every couple of weeks shopping, what if I was thinking about the future? What if on a major scale, what if I started to be concerned not just about how I live, but about issues that are happening around the world that are unsafe? What happens if I began to take the care of God's world seriously? And I was concerned for the next generation and what they would inherit. What if I took this to a major level and cared for the needs of others, even when it's so impossible for me to do it all on my own? Do you know what's interesting is that in Jesus' day, this rule was called the least important commandment. And that's why somebody has a conversation with Jesus and goes, what's the most important? Because it was constantly a debate. It was constantly a thing. Everybody was going like, hey, what's the best? What's the best? What's the worst? What's the most important? What's the least important? And this ranked on the bottom. Do you know what's interesting, though? Is that at one moment, somebody is asking Jesus a question, and Jesus responds, and he says, but if you teach somebody to ignore even the least of all the commandments, you are the least in God's kingdom. Jesus says, if you teach somebody to ignore, like if you're going to rank this and you're going to say, hey, don't worry about the bottom. Jesus says, if you don't worry about the bottom, you're the worst person in my whole kingdom. And so I know this feels kind of crazy, kind of silly. It's a really strange rule. It's a really strange commandment. Some of you are going to leave tonight and be like, I don't know that Josh should keep teaching this. You don't have to worry. Andrew's preaching next week, so you're good. You're good. But, yeah, I guess they were excited that I'm done with this. But I need you to hear something that we don't get to ignore. We have to be concerned about what's coming. We have to be concerned about the needs of others, the care of others. We've got to be concerned, even if you don't care about it for yourself. But we love our neighbors. Let me pray with you. Father God, we want to be good neighbors, not like somebody who's just good in the neighborhood. We want to be the kind of people who bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. God, who are willing to meet the needs of others. God, who are willing to think about the future, who are willing to be shrewd and resourceful, who are willing to be responsible, who are willing to care about these things that, if we're honest, not every teenager cares about. But God, we're not every teenager. God, we are your people. There's no age on that. God, we are your people. And you love us. And one of the greatest things we could do is return the love that you give us to others. Help us do that. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.